Astrology can tell us the absolute best time to plant, harvest, and store our crops. We've been looking towards astrology for thousands and thousands of years, and to understand our personalities, who might be the best fit for us in relationships, and maybe even the best day to buy a lottery ticket. We also use astrology for understanding the best time to plant different crops and the best time to harvest different crops and the best way to store them as well. Gary Cayton has been working with the celestial calendar for years to help identify the absolute best days to plant carrots, for example, which is different than the best day to plant flowers, according to where the stars and the moon all line up. And it actually really makes sense when you think about the impact of the moon on the high tide and low tide of the ocean, when you think about it. I'm really excited to bring you this conversation with Gary Cayton for the Soil Summit. Thank you so much for joining us. You make yourself an amazing day. Gary, it's awesome to be connecting with you about farm astrology. We often hear about people getting their charts done for their personal charts, like the day and the month and the year and where they're born, what time they're born, and the impact of the alignment of the stars for our personal well-being. And some people even do astrology for their business charts and astrology for like their children's charts and their pets charts and all sorts of things. And you actually do astrology for farming and gardening. And I'm wondering what that is and how you ever got into that.
Yeah, no. Well, what's interesting, Natalie, is that what you're talking about, that the kind of astrology that most people are familiar with, what we call natal astrology, which means birth chart astrology, that's a relatively new development. Before, because most people were simply not wealthy enough to hire an astrologer. Astrologers worked for kings and high-ranking people. They were part of the priestly class. And so it's only relatively recent development that regular people had access to astrologers. But before that, which was we can talk about how recent it was, but long before we started doing astrology for birth charts and stuff, we were always doing astrology for the weather, for agriculture. In fact, the zodiac can be seen as basically an agricultural calendar, that's what it is. So really the farming aspect of it is much more primary than it appears to be in today's culture. It's just that we've, in industrial revolution and digital revolution and everything, we've gotten as a culture, we've gotten removed enough from farming as a day-to-day way of life that we don't realize how that the farming aspect of it was primary for a very long time.
The moon and the stars and the alignment of the planets for literally thousands of years to determine when the best time to plant and harvest a crop is.
Pretty much since the dawn of civilization. In fact, civilization as we know it, it can be argued that it came into being as not necessarily as a result of, but along with the discovery of that, there are these bright lights that move. The word planet means wandering star. So there's certain stars, like the fixed stars of the constellations, that are relatively fixed in place. They rise and set at different times of the year, right? But then we have these wandering stars. And when the Mesopotamian cultures began to track those wandering stars and began to figure out what exactly is going on, because there's several different ones and they travel at different speeds. And that's about the time that civilization as we know it began. And before that, we had these megalithic calendars, which were really mainly focused on the sun and the moon. They were aligned to the stars somewhat, but like Stonehenge, it's a calendar. So, when you think about it, humans have always had calendars pretty much as far back as we know.
We know that the moon impacts the high
sun
and low
and the
tide
moon
of
both. Yeah.
Right. And so how does that translate to a seed or what we're harvesting?
Yeah. So the how is a very interesting deal. Science, I don't think that we have an answer for the how that would be satisfactory to a modern scientific viewpoint. That there for a long time it was thought that there were celestial rays that were involved in various things. I like to think of it as like a dance. Like there's and this is the way that classically that it was thought of, is that there were, there are seven heavens, right? So in each heaven is a planetary sphere. And so there's this harmony of the spheres you may have heard of, or the harmony of, right, this celestial harmony that's going on. If we can align ourselves with the celestial harmony, then we're kind of like dancing to a tune that is, closer to God, if you will, right? We're dancing to a beautiful, harmonious tune, and it's by setting up a rhythm with the natural order that we begin to see. It's just like, for instance, it would be very hard for me to say, how does dancing affect your health? Right? But we could do a study to show that people who dance so many hours a week, their health improves. But how? How? I mean, that would be a very hard question to answer, right? You see what I'm saying? And so I think it has to do with just being in tune with the natural rhythms. And the other thing is that essentially, and this sounds very highfalutin, but it's really pretty simple. What biodynamics do is it's a process of setting up a harmony. The different biodynamic preps, for instance, are basically a way to recapitulate the original alchemy of creation, right? Because basically in the beginning there was like chaos, right? And it doesn't matter what civilization or what culture you like, in the beginning there was chaos, and out of chaos came order.
So Gary, what does that look like in practice to use astrology in farming?
Rudolf Steiner was the originator of the biodynamics movement, right? And then a lady named Maria Thun got a hold of it, and she introduced some of her own ideas. And she seems to have been classically trained, because she definitely understood really well the concept of the four elements. And the four elements is actually predates astrology. It goes back to the very foundations of Western philosophy and everything. But Maria began to look at the four elements as being correlated to the four parts of a plant, right? And it has to do with density. Like any child knows that if you take a rock and you toss it in the water, it's going to do what? It's going to sink, right? So that means that the earth element is more dense than the water element, right? And then if you heat water and then the vapor rises, right? So air is less dense than water. And then if you want to like take a trip to the stratosphere, you heat the air and you put it in a balloon and you go up to you can even go up to the edge of space these days. Somebody did that recently and like jumped out at the edge of the stratosphere or something. So you have this density, and the earth is the most dense, water, and then air, and then fire, right? This is really basic, easily observable in nature. And so Maria said, well, these probably correlate to the different parts of the plant. So you have the root, which would be earth. You have the leaf, which would be water. You have the flower part of the plant, which would be air. And you have the fruit, which would be fire. And so she began to do studies where she would plant and watch what happened as she was using the moon passing in front of the constellations and depending on which element, right? There's 12 constellations, 4 elements, so there's 3 constellations belonging to each element. And she found that not only did it affect the growth of the plants, but also that she noticed that the weather was involved. So she realized, like, there's this dance between, like, the moon and the constellations and the weather and the plants all happening. And, like, if I can tune into that and begin to establish a rhythm. So for instance, a really simple example would be, if we want to, one of the first things that I farmed when I was a young man, I was on an organic farm. We were planting elephant garlic. Elephant garlic is a root crop, right? So we're going to set up a rhythm. So we're going to break the soil open when the moon is passing in front of an earth constellation. And then we're going to plant the bulbs when the moon, and then we're going to cultivate when the moon is in front of an earth constellation, right? So we're going to set up this rhythm of being in harmony with the constellation, with the element that corresponds to the part of the plant that we're wanting to harvest. And that's really the simplest way to use the calendar. And that's probably, I mean, I don't know, but I would guess that the vast majority of people, that's the main thing that they're doing, because, we have a color-coded section on for the calendar, and people love that, right? Because it makes it easy. Okay, like,
Right. And you're talking about the celestial calendar,
yes,
right? Yeah, there it is, the 2023. Yep. And what Gary's talking about is this E code. And this helps us know when to plant root vegetables, when to plant water vegetables, when to plant fire, I guess not even vegetables, but plants. And then also gray area is where it's blocked out. So you ideally don't want to be doing anything, any planting in those areas. Yeah. So a person can look at this, Gary, and go, yeah, but what about if it rains? Like, ideally, sure, we can use this, but what happens if it rains or if we're impacted by weather? Then what do we do?
One of the basic ideas there is that you have complementary elements. So let's say you're working with a root crop, and you're working with the earth, both earth and water. The alchemical symbol for earth and water is a downward pointing triangle, because both earth and water tend to settle down. Whereas fire and air, the alchemical symbol is like this. The fire and air move up and out. So if you're working with a root crop and it rains or whatever, and you have to get something done, you can use the next water day instead of the next earth day, because those are complementary. With some exceptions, you don't want to harvest root crops on a water day, because they're going to tend to retain more water and they might rot. That kind of thing, you can use complementary elements. And the thing is, the moon's going to be in that constellation for 2-3 days. So if it rains one day, hopefully, although, I mean, I know how it is here in the southern Appalachians where I'm at, we can get rains that last, several days and without stop.
Yeah. And what are some of the benefits of using a calendar, a planting calendar?
Right. So that, as I said, the benefits are that we establish a rhythm with you begin to have a rhythm for your activity. So it gives you a structure, it gives you a container, it gives you like a sacred dance that you're participating in, and you can begin to, whether somebody's using a calendar at the moment or not, they kind of are, because like down here where I'm at, pretty much you don't plant until after Mother's Day, right? Because, you don't have frost-free days until after that. So you're already doing a certain amount of stuff that is based on calendar type stuff anyways. And this is just taking it like 2 or 3 steps further to give more of a structure in a container. And, if you look at the pictures in Maria Thune's books, I mean, it's pretty striking, the results that she came up with as far as like, better yields, better, better looking plants, better, healthier plants, and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I'm curious to help us understand this concept a little bit more. So if we're planting a root, because I'm going back to the push and pull of the sun and the moon on the water in the ocean and on the tides. And so is that the same kind of thing with when we plant a seed on a root day? Is there more of that like pulling into the earth and more nourishment like on a planetary and energetic level that is awakening that to drop into the earth and reach up to the skies for that birthing or awakening of the seed?
Yeah, exactly. Like basically you're setting up a harmony between the celestial, vibrations and what you're doing here on earth. So as above, so below, and yeah, I mean, in fact, as near as I can tell, Maria even she sussed out where the boundaries between the constellations are by planting, stuff, adjacent, so that there could be a difference even on the same day, right? If the moon changes signs, she might be in one sign early in the morning and another sign in the afternoon, right? And so, you might see a difference depending on whether you plant in the morning or the afternoon on particular days.
Amazing. I wonder, I wish I was using the planting calendar when I was harvesting dahlias, because I had a huge success rate with our dahlia tubers, never rotting. I mean, some would go bad, but hardly any. And then one year I picked them, and I'm not kidding you, I had thousands of pounds of dahlia, one of them rotted. And I am so curious if I harvested them. I know they were wet when I picked them, but there were other years I picked them and they were really wet too. And I can't help but wonder if that year, if I picked them and it was on that day when you might not have wanted to harvest would it be on a water day?
Yeah. You don't want to harvest root crops on a water day because, and so what you would actually do is harvest them on a fire or an air day, because the fire and air would tend to be more dry. You want them to stay dry.
So powerful. And then same with the planting calendar is also really helpful to help us understand if we're harvesting seeds, right? Like, so for example, garlic, if you're planting garlic for the garlic bulb, then you'd want to plant it on a root day. And if you're planting garlic for saving the seed to plant the next year, would you plant it on a fire day because you're saving the actual bulbs for
well, that's a really good question. If you're saving the seed, like garlic can go to seed, but I think most people actually plant it's particularly elephant garlic. It's like a 2-year process if you go from seed to bulb, whereas if you plant one of the pieces of the bulb, it's going to be like a 1-year process. So if you're harvesting like the bulb, then you would stay with the earth. But if you're harvesting the seed, you would probably go with the fire or air.
Oh, that's really cool. Huh. What's one of your favorite parts of the planting calendar as a farmer and gardener?
One of my favorite parts is the one that's most challenging. Like any good almanac, one of the things that the planting calendar has is weather forecasts, and the thing about that is that, we have such a wide range of readership or usership or whatever you want to call it, that, the weather, I mean, right now it's cold where both of us live. So, it's interesting to, sometimes that's just, the forecast is as simple as that, it's forecast for colder than normal temperatures for
Yeah.
instance. But like when it comes to rain and stuff, it can be really interesting because, I remember last year there were several planets that were moving in front of water constellations and whatnot. And I thought that, and I mentioned I was giving a class actually in North Carolina, at Gaia Herbs. And I was telling them, yeah, like this coming up later this week, there's going to be, several planets in the water thing. And so it's probably, and sure enough, there was like this, big rain and the creeks got swelled up and everything. But the weird thing about that is like, in the Midwest, it might have been dry. You know what I'm saying? So it's a
Right.
little bit, so it's really neat. It's kind of fun to work with and watch and learn the weather forecasting part of it. But it's also really tricky because like, where exactly am I forecasting for? Because, I can't be right everywhere
Right.
all at once, so it's kind of challenging, but that's what makes it fun, is the challenge.
Mhm, mhm. And then you also forecast and help us understand when to apply the biodynamic preparations the most.
Yeah, that was mostly Rosemary and Catherine. They were
Okay.
working. Hugh Courtney was
That's right. That's you.
was
Yeah.
their mentor for that. But one thing that I can tell you, if you look at the calendar and you'll notice that, remember how we were talking about the elements, and
Yep.
you'll notice that usually when you see the BD 500, which is like the manure,
Yeah.
right? That's usually on an Earth day, right? Because manure, Earth,
Yeah. There you go.
Whereas if you're doing the 501, a lot of times you'll see that, which is a silica, right? And the silica is more about opening up to the cosmic ethers, right? So there's two basic forces. There's like the cosmic. Remember how we said fire and air are up and out, right? The symbols for. So a lot of times you'll see the 501 on the air and fire days.
Right. There's a 501 there.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. But as far as the sequential spraying and stuff like that, that's a whole nother art form that that Catherine and Rosemary got from Hugh that I'm not exactly privy to just yet.
Right. My apologies. I forgot about that. What do you most want people to know and understand about planting calendars and how to use them?
I guess the thing that I would say is that it's a wonderful tool that you can use to just, there's so much there that you can get in touch with the stars, right? It'll tell you when Mercury is visible, for instance. I mean, when's the last time that you saw Mercury in the sky, for instance? It's not an easy planet to spot. And not a lot of people have actually seen it. And so it's a wonderful tool that gives you the ability to tune into the natural forces around you, and then to begin to set up a rhythm and a dance with those natural forces that you can be a part of. So I think it's a wonderful tool to sort of bring beauty and harmony into your life.
And how do you like to work with it, Gary? Do you like to just take it day by day, or do you sit down at the beginning of your season when you're planning out what you're going to plant and when you're going to harvest, or do you look at it week by week? How do you make really good use of the calendar?
Yeah, I mean, so because I'm working with the thing a year ahead of time before anybody ever even sees it, in actually constructing the thing, I'm more like, yeah, let me get set up, before the season starts and have all my ducks in a row kind of thing. I could see how, it might be nice to just have, take it day by day. and just,
Mhm.
look at the calendar and think, and, that would be nice.
Mhm.
I almost kind of wish I could do it that way, because it would be simple and kind of,
Yeah.
but because I'm so involved in all of the stuff, like I just can't, like I probably, okay, like, you know, let me get everything, figured out for the whole season. And
Right. So
uh,
you're talking about it from a creation perspective, because Gary actually does all of the calculations for when to plant and harvest, and it's incredibly detailed, and it's really easy to use. It's one of my favorite tools that I came across. And so from a creation perspective, or from a farming and gardening perspective, sometimes I fly by the pants and go day by day. What I
yeah,
found most powerful though is like what you said, sitting down at the beginning of the season and looking at what I'm wanting to plant, and just even if I'm not writing down, oh, this is, carrots and beets, and on this day, I can see, I can wrap my head around how I might do things, what is coming up in head with the planet.
yeah. And usually it ends up having to be a marriage of both, right? Like, no matter how much planning you do ahead of time, like you said, it might rain, or it might be, whatever, and or life happens, and then you're like, oh gosh, then there's always some amount of flying by the seat of your pants that's going to have to be done.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's usually a marriage of a little bit of both.
Yeah. And Gary, you actually put all this together for us. And so how long does that take to map out an entire year for a planting calendar?
Like you said, there is a lot of different factors in there. If you just look at all of the different columns and stuff,
Yeah.
and so there's the part of like just looking it up, right? So looking up the information, then I have to do the data entry, and then I have to go back and like double check myself to make sure I didn't, there's no typos or put it in the wrong column or any of that. So just for the just to get all of the data calculated and put together, it usually takes me, and this is not like 8 hours a day, because I have other stuff to do, obviously, but it usually takes me 2.5 months working on it every day, to get
Wow.
all that stuff together. Yeah, it's a pretty intensive deal to get all of that information together.
Yeah, well, I mean, the amount of information in here is next level. It's awesome. I'm deeply grateful for it. And I'm curious, tell us some of the results that Marie taught her in using the planting calendar. Like, she increased her yields. What else can we expect to notice, or might we want to pay attention to?
Well, one of the things that really struck me is the photographs that she has in her books.
Mhm.
Like, for instance, you mentioned some of the grayed out days. And so the reason for those grayed out days is there are some uh, planetary influences that are considered disruptive, like, for instance, eclipses, which,
Mhm.
going back to the beginning of time, have been thought to be like, whoa, what's going on? Um, and you'll see pictures in the books of like, when like, say she's planting a root crop, and you'll see like these normal roots, and then here's one that was planted on a node day, or eclipse day or something, and it's like twisted and gnarled, and really weird looking, and not, and it's like, oh my goodness, like that's pretty dramatic. you know and then she had another set of pictures of, she had like some plums that she planted, and she used different planetary alignments. So generally, when you're working with trees, you want to work with what we call the superior planets, the planets that are farther away from the earth than the sun, because they are invoking the cosmic forces, which, once again, like fire and air, so this, and the silica, it's like this up and out energy, right? Because you want trees to grow tall
Mhm.
and whatnot. And so the three superior planets are Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And so she planted the same plums with Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and the color that she got from each one was very different depending on what planetary day or alignment she planted it with. It's like,
Wow.
yeah. And so that is pretty fascinating, to see that, like, the Mars plums were really red, and I think the Saturn ones were like this really dark purple, and it's like, wow, that's pretty
Wow.
remarkable. Yeah.
The same plum trees.
Yeah. So, that's fascinating stuff. And it really makes you like think like, wow,
Mhm.
there's basic energetic signatures or something that with these, and this again, like, and it's only within the last couple hundred years really that what I'm talking about was not the norm.
Well, it's so amazing, Gary, because we think about, I mean, I'm in the prairies right now, right? And when it's planting time, it's go time. And at the same time, sometimes there can be that breath of flexibility to plant a day earlier or a day later. Wondering, like, thing on a day that could impact their crop being a success, or if they waited 24 more hours to even just not plant on that really disruptive time. That's the difference between, thousands of pounds of like oats or wheat or barley or peas or lentils or whatever it is. That's like, it's massive. So I'm really curious about, because we think about, farming and gardening on a small scale, and it's like, oh, well, the carrots didn't do so good, or the beets didn't do so good, or, the pea crop was kind of weak. And but when we're looking at farmers who are doing massive amounts of production, I just, that could be the difference between a successful year and a non-successful year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, that's why I think that it's something that is worth looking into and something
Mhm.
worth trying, I mean, if you have, any kind of uh what do we say, skin in the game, so to speak,
Yeah.
if you're doing this for a living, yeah, why not try it?
Yes.
Because if it does give you that edge, then it's going to be, a major difference maker for your ability to, you know, stay one step. And farming is hard. It's not easy to make a living as a farmer,
Yeah.
I'm really impressed by anybody who can, make a full-time living as a farmer.
Hmm.
It's a tough game these days.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much thank you for helping us understand how we can use it and apply it, and all the benefits that we can get from leaning into the astrology of farming and the impact that planting and harvesting on certain days has on our crops.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Find Gary at dreamastrologer.com. It's amazing when we stop and pause to think about and really tune into how interconnected everything is, how interconnected our plants are with the soil, with our gut, with the air around us, with the rain that falls on our skin and gets absorbed into the ground, and with the moon and the stars and the heavens above. From experience, a carrot will grow on a day that is not necessarily ideal to plant a carrot. And at the same time, it's really interesting to see the impact of how the plants grow when they are planted on the days that are ideal for them to be planted. And it's interesting to see the impact of how carrots and potatoes store when they're harvested on the best day for storage. Thanks for joining us for the Soil Summit. We are deeply honored to have you here. You make yourself an amazing day. Big love.